Vanakkam. Former Associate Deputy Attorney General in the U.S. Department of Justice, a constitutional lawyer and an international lawyer with Bruce Fein and Associates. Attorney Bruce Fein is here with us in the studio. Mr. Fein was retained by the U.S.-based human rights organization Tamils for Justice, who seek human rights and justice for Tamils and a permanent peace in Sri Lanka. Mr. Fein's work is cut out to be de-proscription of the LTT in the USA, statehood for Tamils in Sri Lanka, and to bring to justice U.S. citizens holding power in Sri Lanka who are believed to be guilty of gross violations of humanitarian laws and crimes against Tamils. In addition to this TV interview, Mr. Fein will make appearances to answer your questions at 3 different venues. Tomorrow, Thursday, 19th June, from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the banquet hall at Radisson Hotel at 55 Hall Crown Place. On Friday, June 20th, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the Kannada Kandaswamy Kovil Hall at 733 Birchmount Road. And on Saturday, June 21st, from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. at the same venue, Kannada Kandaswamy Kovil. இந்த நிகழ்ச்சி ஆங்கிலத்தில் நடைபெறும் என்பதை உங்களுக்கு அறிய தருகின்றோம். உங்கள் கேள்விகள் தமிழில் இருந்தால் தாராளமாக கேட்கலாம். அதனை நான் மொழிபெயர்ப்பேன் என்பதையும் உங்களுக்கு அறிய தருகின்றோம். Good evening, Mr. Fein.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and explain Tamils for Justice and our objectives.
Excellent. Now, you obviously have a great deal of experience in the field of law. And you are an international lawyer. And you've worked with many congressmen, and you've worked with the U.S. government for a very long time. How did you get yourself involved in the small islands problem?
Well, I'd involved earlier in a similar kind of problem in Kashmir, where there's an effort to bring a plebiscite on Kashmiri independence or association with India or Pakistan. And I was approached, I guess, last fall by Tamils for Justice to inquire into the plight, the persecution of the Tamils, and to see whether or not this is a particular program and endeavor that I could undertake. And once I was approached, I immersed myself more than previously in the details since 1948 of the steady erosion of rights, culminating, I guess, in the 1983 race riots and organized and celebrated by the government, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which really is a reduction of Tamils to serfdom in Sri Lanka, and said, yeah, this is something that warrants the highest level of scrutiny to bring justice and peace to this convulsed nation.
Now, apart from the fact that you are being retained by Tamils for Justice, you seem to have a personal interest in the particular case. Is that true?
Well, it's personal. I don't have any family there. I mean, so that I'm not risking, like many of the other brave Tamils, retaliation there, although I'm probably the subject of curses by the Rajapakses already if you visit their websites. But surely this quest is something that honors our own heritage in the United States. I was inspired at a young age by our own Declaration of Independence, and that is really what set the standard globally for the conditions which justify a people in seeking independent statehood from a state of oppression. What our founding fathers said was that when a long train of events evinces a clear and unmistakable attempt to reduce a people to despotism or vassalage, people not only have a right but a duty to overthrow that government. And of course our own Declaration of Independence set a benchmark for oppression that would justify independent statehood by indicting King George III then for a variety of crimes. If you examine the indictment of King George III and the kinds of rapacity, if you will, the assassinations of Tamil MPs, the disappearances, the kidnappings over long years with no prosecutions whatsoever, the oppression that the Tamils are suffering are several benchmarks above that set by the Declaration of Independence. And indeed, right here in Canada, think that those in Quebec get to vote on whether they want independence. And what their conditions are in Canada are a paradise to what you would find with the Tamils sitting in Colombo with the sword of Damocles over their head every day, because the Sinhalese can arrest, detain, search, put in incommunicado without any judicial review at any time they want. And so this is something that really is an obligation of the United States to be true to its own heritage, to say, we announced these principles in the Declaration of Independence that were universal. They weren't confined to the Western Hemisphere. They weren't confined to white Anglo-Saxons. It said all individuals, all people, are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights. They aren't there because of the sufferance of any kind of government. And that's why this is so, it seems to me, essential to honor the true vision of the United States of America.
Mm-hmm. Now, you are set out to do 3 different parts on this, all under one umbrella, which is to bring about a referendum for Tamil statehood. Now, let's talk about each different actions you're going to...
Yeah, they act in tandem. You're exactly right. The overall goal, if I want to put it in a large sense, is to unify all the Tamil diaspora behind Tamils for Justice. It's inclusive. We're broadening our base. We don't exclude anybody who shares our objectives. And that is because in the past, the splintering, if you will, of the Tamil diaspora into many different, we call it ink blots or whatever, have proven wholly ineffective in casting light on the oppression of the Tamils and pricking, if you will, the conscience of the international community so they would do what they did in Kosovo or East Timor, clear models for the Tamils to achieve and have an opportunity to vote on statehood. And if we ask, well, what does, say, prosecuting the Rajapaksa brothers who are citizens or resident aliens in General Fonseca for crimes against humanity or extrajudicial killings, even genocide in the United States do? Well, it puts pressure on them in order to accommodate the justice of the Tamil cause. If you had an indictment and you would agree, you would drop the indictment if they would acquiesce in stopping the war and having statehood, that would be a great success, even though perhaps perfect justice was denied because their crimes would be shielded from the scales of justice. But it would be worth it because there's so many lives being lost every day. Every 5 hours there's a disappearance in Sri Lanka. Every 5 hours. And no one in the high levels is ever prosecuted. You know, it's like living in a state of nature. And similarly, with regard to deproscription, we think that the statutory criteria that our United States Congress enacted for listing someone simply have not been satisfied. That largely means you've got to demonstrate an organization has killed or threatened an American, and there's no showing that that has happened in Sri Lanka. And then there's a more residual, if you will, vague standard about threatening the national security of the United States. And if you just think in an instinctive fashion, you're looking at the government of Sri Lanka, which has its president go visit Mr. Ahmadinejad, President Ahmadinejad in Iran. This is a figure in a country that the United States has at its peak of animosity. Spread of nuclear weapons, supporting the destruction of Israel, sponsoring Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations. This is what the government of Sri Lanka is doing. How does it hurt the national security interests of the United States to deproscribe an organization that, how does that undermine what the United States is seeking to accomplish when the government of Sri Lanka itself is undermining critical national security interests of certainly of the United States itself. So also we think that again, that particular gambit would accelerate the ultimate goal here, which is free and fair referendum conducted and organized by a United Nations mission after a period of what we call the transitional administrative authority of the United Nations to ensure that the campaigning for or against the referendum is in a period of peace. You could anticipate a decommissioning of the arms by the Tigers, a cessation of hostilities by the government of Sri Lanka, and then the exercise of legislative, judicial, and executive power by the United Nations. It's not something that is invented new for the Tamils. Precisely that was done in East Timor. And you had a referendum, and some 99% of the East Timorese voted for independence. But we are not in favor or against any particular result of that referendum. The goal here is to empower the Tamil people themselves to decide their fate. No coercion on one side or the other. They get to decide where they think their